Hello and welcome, my name is Rasho, and today we will be covering the Valkyr rework. Now I actually covered Valkyr relatively recently on my channel. I did a video on her back in December last year, right before the Warframe 99 updates dropped. And in that video I talked about how, well, her kit is somewhat outdated in very ways. She was still a really good Warframe even back then, because she did a lot of damage and she was immune to damage. So you didn't really need much more. But now that her rework has come out, she is a even more incredible Warframe. She still has the same level of damage immunity, it just works differently now, and her abilities work a lot more better now. Her passive is gone from being pretty useless to being amazing. Her first ability is also really good now, and her third is still not the greatest, but still a lot better than what it was before. So let's go over her kit. I won't talk about what her kit used to be, I'll just talk about what it is now. If you are familiar with how her old kit was, I'll leave a link down below from my previous Valkyr video that goes over her previous kit. So I'll just go over her new kit, how it works, and then obviously I'll show off my build, which is pretty much the exact same as my previous build. It's just been slightly updated with the new changes to the Exalted weapons and obviously the rework. So let's get into it. Starting off with her passive. So her passive is really good and really powerful. Whenever you deal melee damage to an opponent, you build up a damage buff specifically for melee weapons. That goes all the way up to 300%. As long as the damage buff you have currently is above 150%, Valkyr will also gain a health gate bonus. If you don't damage enemies after a set amount of time, the buff will start to decay, and you can just simply damage an enemy again with a melee weapon to start making it go up again. If you, like I said, if you do have above 150% of the buff, and you would take lethal damage, instead of dying, you will instead get a health gate. You will become immune to damage for 5 seconds. Your health will be fully restored, but the entirety of the buff will go away. However, the buff charges really quickly, and there's no cooldown to the health gate function. This effectively means you're always going to be immune to dying, because as soon as the buff wears off, you'll easily be able to build it up again within the 5 seconds of immunity. That means by the time you can actually be damaged again, you already have the 150 seconds build up again, 150%, sorry, build up again, and then therefore have the health gate, and you just can't die. As you can see, I'm doing this over and over again. I always build off the 150% before my vulnerability ends up, and then if I do take lethal damage, I still have the health gate there, so I literally just can't die. As long as you're being active and, you know, playing the game, you just won't be able to die. So she still has the same level of invulnerability as she used to. It just works differently now, because instead of getting it from her fourth ability, you get it from her passive through a more active gameplay through a health gate. So her first ability is still the standard wire that you're used to, where you can hook it onto a wall and it will fling shot you, and you can kind of play as if you're playing the first Ascendant, giving you that extra movability, which is pretty fun. However, it has been greatly improved with the way it works against enemies. Previously, if you would use this on an enemy, it would just fling them towards you, and instead of like having them group in front of you or something, they would be flung behind you, so it wouldn't really do anything. Now what it does is it will not only launch you at an enemy, but it will also group all those enemies together, and you'll even perform a melee attack. So it makes it a really good ability, honestly, as it groups, launches you at enemies, and performs a melee attack. So honestly, this ability is amazing now. Her second ability has honestly been unchanged for the most part. It is pretty standard, works the same way as what it did before. It was already a really good ability. The only change is that the slow effect that it used to have is now moved to the third ability. This actually works really well, because the slow effect it had was kind of dumb, because you would cast the ability, the slow effect only happened on the initial cast. It wasn't like Gloom that slowed whenever enemies entered a certain radius. And also the augment for this ability makes it so it has infinite duration, so you really didn't have to. So you would never end up recasting the ability. So now it just does what its other two effects were, and which is when the ability is activated, you get two buffs: a attack speed buff and also a armor buff. And both buffs are 50% scaling off strength. And the armor buff is really nice. Valkyr has the highest armor value in the game of 1000 armor, which is how much her prime has by default. So even with the 50% buff, you end up getting 1500 armor, which is a lot of armor. And a 50% attack speed buff is also really, really good. It's a really big buff, and that scales with strength as well. So you get a massive attack speed buff from this ability. And like I said, the augment works where when you get kills with while the ability is activated, it will increase the duration of the ability, making so you can have 100% uptime on it. Next is her third ability, which has been improved a lot, but it is still probably her worst ability, especially because the first ability has been improved to be a really good grouping ability. Basically, now the way it works is when you cast it, you will not only slow enemies within the range of the cast, but those enemies will also be weaker to melee damage. So it's pretty cool. It gives you a damage buff against those enemies and also slows them. So you get some crowd control, survivability through crowd control, and also additional damage. The only reason why I would say it's still not that great is because it suffers from the same issue a lot of abilities like this do, where if you rely on it for a consistent DPS buff, you'll be casting it more than you'll actually be attacking enemies because of how quickly we kill enemies in this game, which puts it in a situation where you actually lower your DPS because it takes time to cast, and while that cast animation happens, you can't attack enemies, and you'll activate the ability, immediately kill all the enemies that you just casted it on, meaning you have to recast it again, like straight away, so you just have to constantly be casting the ability over and over again to get any consistent DPS out of it. However, it can still be a good ability to give you some, kind of like a red alarm ability, I suppose, because it will not only slow down enemies, but also increase your damage. So it can be useful for that way. Personally, though, I would say this is the most Helminthable ability on her kit right now. I still have her first ability, Helminth, on the build I will show, but that's just because that's what I originally Helminthed off with my original build, and I'm too lazy to swap it over. And finally, her fourth ability. So her fourth ability is the main thing about her kit. It is a exalted weapon. It is exalted claws, and it does a lot of damage with really good stats. It has like a 50% crit chance, crit chance, and I think it's like a 2 times, like a 2.5 crit damage at base. So it has a really good stats when it comes to critting, and it can be very, very powerful and do a lot of damage, especially with her new passive. Originally, this ability did a stupid amount of damage on the slash attack, but now it's been buffed, so the actual normal attack of the ability also does a lot more damage as well, making it much better. When the ability is activated, attacks from your fourth ability will also heal you, which is also really good as it gives you that additional survivability. And the armor buff you'll get from your second ability will also be increased by 3. So with the build I currently have on, I get, I think, a 156% armor buff from the second. So with my fourth ability activated, that 156% is multiplied by 3, so it ends up to being like a 450 something % armor buff. So I end up with over 5,600 armor, which ends up giving me around about 95% damage reduction. So you end up getting a crap ton of damage reduction and an insane amount of armor when pairing her fourth and her second ability together. The fourth ability used to give you immunity, like damage immunity. You no longer benefit from that once it's reworked. But like I said, you still are immune when you play as Valkyr because of the way her passive works. And since it is a health gate with no cooldown and a 5-second period of vulnerability, which is quite a while, you can easily rebuild up the health, her passive, so you can restock your health gate before you end up taking damage again to actually be killed, so you effectively have damage immunity, even if it's not the same as how it was before. And that only really matters if you're doing endurance mission, because of the amount of armor she has and the amount of damage reduction she gets, and also the healing she gets by attacking enemies with her fourth ability. You're not even going to ever need to rely on the health gate, because you'll just be so naturally tanky for most of the game's content anyway. Anyway, this build I have is incredibly basic, incredibly simple. It is just a build based around pumping out as much damage as possible with her fourth ability. And the way we do this is obviously using the fourth ability and the second ability to give me that extra attack speed. And then we are relying on Kulavo's Helminth ability, Raffle Vance, to give me a massive crit buff, so I don't have to mod for crit chance on the weapon itself, which will make it do an absolute insane amount of damage. And then, like I said, I have Helminth off the first ability, not the third ability, but I would recommend you Helminth off the third ability instead of the first, because the first ability does give you a good amount of mobility, and also it groups enemies for you, which can also be very helpful, especially for the setup, but the third ability isn't really doing that much. Again, it's just previously the first ability was also bad, just like the third ability, a lot worse than what the third ability is now. So it didn't matter back then if I got rid of the first or the third, because both of them are trash and they did nothing, so I just got rid of the first, and I'm too lazy to swap over what Helminth I have on her. I'm also using the augment for her second ability, which will give me infinite uptime on the second ability, which means I won't have to recast it, which is very nice. And the fourth ability is a draining ability, and I have plenty of energy economy, so I also don't have to recast that either, which means the only ability I'll have to continuously recast is Wrathful Advance, meaning it's very light on energy. Well, it's very easy to like maintain your damage rotation, as you just need to cast. You just watch to see if your damage numbers turn from red to like yellow and orange. There you know Wrathful Advance is worn off, and just simply recast it again. Since you're using Wrathful Advance, I would recommend going into the inverted tap hold settings to change Kaluvo's inverted tap holds to be, well, inverted. This makes it so you can just tap to teleport, which gives you that crit chance buff without needing to perform a heavy attack, so you don't have to waste your combo counter, which will give me a slight damage buff for even more crit chance through some of the mods we're using. In addition to this, I am also using 5 Violet Archon Shards, each of which give me 50% extra melee critical damage, because I will easily be over that 500 energy max damage to give me the double 25% melee crit damage. This gives me an insane amount of crit damage on top of what I already have modded, so I'm doing a crazy amount of damage. This is unnecessary. It's honestly just really nice and really fun to have to get some stupid damage numbers with this setup. Now, the actual Valkyr build. First of all, Eternal War is the augment. Valkyr does have augments for all of her other abilities, however, I don't really recommend using them as they're not really that useful. I will briefly go over them though. The augment for the fourth ability just changes it from a drain ability to a duration based ability and gives it some slight buffs, but one of the beauties of the ability is that it's a drain ability and you don't have to worry about recasting it, so I would recommend just using its normal form. The third ability augment is unless it's been changed, it should group enemies together when you cast it. Her first ability is just a much better grouping ability, so I don't really see a use for this. And I'm pretty sure the first ability augment simply just reduces the energy cost of consecutive casts of the ability if you're in the air. So again, none of the augments besides her second ability is really worth using, which is why I only covered the second ability augment when I went through the build, the ability explanation. I'm using Arcane Blessing for the additional health. This will give me an additional 1,500 health at max stacks, which should give me 2,250 health total. This will give me all the EHP I need to just tank shots because of the amount of armor I'll have from my second and fourth ability. Honestly, I was playing with her before without Arcane Blessing, and I was just running the base 750 health she has, and I wasn't even getting damaged like a tiny bit. So you honestly could probably get away with not having any health mods at all. But just to be safe, I am adding Arcane Blessing for that extra bit of tankiness. And then Arcane Battery is our source of energy. Since we will have over 5,600 armor, we are going to get an insane amount of energy, max energy from Arcane Battery, so we don't have to worry about anything like Prime Flow, and we will easily go over that 50 max armor needed to get the extra critical damage buff from the Violet Shards. Now, reminded, along with Prime Continuity, is for our duration. Not only does Wrathful Advance have quite a low duration at base, so duration works well with Wrathful Advance, but also it does reduce the amount of energy cost that the fourth ability has, so that also works well. We have Equilibrium for the energy economy. This is kind of needed because with the drain ability, you want to make sure you have a lot of energy economy, and Equilibrium offers a lot of energy economy, so it works quite well. And then we have Transient Fortitude, Blind Rage, August Secrets, and Umbral Intensify for all the strength we could possibly have, sitting at 388% strength, which equals up to a 308% absolute crit chance buff for melees, a 154 armor increase buff and attack speed buff, and that armor increase buff is multiplied by 3 when the fourth ability is activated, and it also increases the damage of our fourth ability as well, so strength works really well on her. Next, the actual build for her claws. I am using melee exposure for the arcane. This is really the best arcane for a raw damage setup. It simply just gives me a corrosive damage buff whenever I cast abilities, and the duration of it is longer than Wrathful Advance's duration, which means we'll never run out of this buff, because whenever Wrathful Advance deactivates, we'll recast it, which will reset melee exposure, so that works really well. I am using Condition Overload for the damage. I do believe the passive, Valkyr's new passive, gives base damage, so it will be additive with Condition Overload, and I am using a companion to Prime for me, so we can get some really good damage numbers with Condition Overload. We have Galvanized Steel, not really for the crit chance, but mainly for the 120% extra crit damage. Gladiator Might, also mainly for the crit damage, not for the extra crit chance, though both do give me crit chance, and it ends up giving me tier 5 red crits, which is amazing. And then we have Organ Shatter, again for even more crit damage. I am using Primed Reach because it is a claw, so it doesn't have the biggest range. So Primed Reach does help a lot when increasing that range. And then we are also running a faction mod as it is multiplicative of base damage, so it works really well with raw damage builds because it's just going to increase our damage by a lot. And then for the elements, I am currently running Viral because I was running this build against Orkin, but I would recommend changing what the modded elements to be whatever the enemy you're going up against is weak to. So for example, Grenier would be corrosive, Infested would be like heat, and so forth and so forth. For the companion, I originally was going to go with Diriga for priming, but I actually decided to go with Nautilus with Taziko and Duplex Bond, which should honestly actually be more consistent with priming, and just be stupidly crazy with priming enemies and work really, really well. So for the Nautilus build, I am running Guardian, which gives me additional survivability, though it's not really important for this build. We have Menifar Bond to reduce the cooldowns on all of Nautilus' abilities, mainly Cordon, which will have Nautilus group enemies for us, which obviously works well for us because, once again, the melee weapon does have a relatively small range, so with enemies grouped together, it'll be easier for us to cut them down, which works really well. We have Duplex Bond, not for the extra energy orb generation, but because we're using a lot of energy through our 4th ability, so we'll spawn a bunch of the clones that will go around priming enemies with the Taziko, so we'll get a ton of priming going on, which will work really well for this setup. Synth Deconstruct will also increase the chance of health orb drops, which synergizes well with not only Equilibrium for our own energy economy, but also synergizes well with Arcane Blessing to give us all the to build up the stacks for Arcane Blessing really fast. Enhanced Vitality and Calculated Redirection are obviously for the companion's survivability. Primary Gen is also for the companion's survivability, lowering the respawn time or when it does go down. And then we have Assault Mode, which is a must-have if you want the companion to actually attack enemies, which we do. And Vacuum is also another must-have mod. For the companion weapon, I'm going Taziko. Simply put, it's the best companion weapon when it comes to priming enemies. We are running Radiation, Magnetic, and also Viral, and the weapon also has an inherent electricity, which gives us 4 status effects for Condition Overload. In addition to that, we have our status chance, reload speed, fire rate plus punch through, and also multi-shot. For the utility weapons, you can go for whatever you want for your primary and secondary. However, I'd recommend running Amalgam Serration and Amalgam Barrel Diffusion on your primary and secondary for the extra movement ability. I also recommend running primary and secondary dexterity as it increases your combo duration, which we don't rely on our combo counter too much, but we are running Gladiator Might, which gives us good chance scaling off our combo counter, so it is nice to have. And also you could put on the 2 Orca mods on your secondary as well, Orca Pack and Orca Seeker, which gives an additional survivability. Again, not needed, but it is nice to have. And then I am running the Protos for my melee because of the 2nd evolution giving me sprint speed and slide, and the 4th evolution giving me parkour velocity. And then lastly, for the focus skill, I do recommend Naramon, as this is a quick attack melee build, and Naramon is just really, really good for quick attack melee builds because of the Power Strike passive right here. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy Valkyr's rework because it is honestly really, really good. I know a lot of people were concerned about her losing her invulnerability from her 4th ability, but her passive works really, really well, giving her effectively the same level of damage immunity. It's just a much more active version of it, but she's still pretty much impossible to kill. She's super powerful, she does an insane amount of damage now, and her abilities just work really well together because her 4th ability always gave you that health regen on attacks, and her 2nd ability also gave you that armor, but you were immune to damage whenever the 4th was activated, which didn't really make sense. So her kit works a lot better now. It makes more sense. It's designed better. So overall, I think this rework is a major improvement for her, and she's super fun, does a stupid amount of damage, and I hope you enjoy her as well. Maybe check out some of my other content. If you did enjoy this video, give me a like, subscribe. Feel free to leave me any comment of a recommendation of a video you want to see in the future. Though right now on my roster, I have going over a few of the new augments that came out in this update. And so stick around for them if you're interested. And until next time, bye-bye.